Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Hypertrends. We had a longer this time without videos, but now we are restarting the series. You see, I'm also in my new office, and today I have invited my friend Sven from also Microsoft. So we will introduce him half a bit shortly after, and we will discuss the overall Azure Stack licensing and also the service licensing. So, Sven, just give us a short intro to yourself, and then yeah, let's go for it, I would say.
Yes, perfect. So thanks a lot for having me. I'm Sven Langenfeld. I'm working for Microsoft since 2012, and so almost 13 years now. But for the last 3 years, I'm in a new role called the Azure Stack HCI Commercial Sales Specialist. And in this role, I bring together all the stakeholders that are relevant for the success of Azure Stack HCI. So we have the hardware vendors with certified hardware and a lot of internal knowledge. We have the internal Microsoft sales people and technical supporters. And of course, we have the system integrators that are doing great business with our customers. So it's a kind of business development, and part of my role is to do readiness and awareness all across bigger Europe. And so I'm glad to be part of that hybrid friend session today.
Thank you. And yeah, let's start with the licensing. So we have different levels of licensing. We have the operating system itself, and we have the services. So I would say let's start with the simplest part on Azure Stack HCI to understand what levels we have, and then I said with the operating system license in the first place.
Yes, of course. So I think it makes sense to understand at first level what exactly we are talking about at the moment. We're talking about the host operating system that is including Hyper-V as an hypervisor, that is including storage spaces direct as Microsoft software-defined storage solution, and including software-defined networking. So everything you need to manage your physical hardware and your virtual instances on top of that. What we are not covering with Azure Stack HCI is the licensing for the guest operating systems, for example. These have to be licensed separately to the host operating system. So very similar when you have a third-party hypervisor or another HCI solution, you are paying for the host operating system solution. And on top of that, you have to license your Windows instances or maybe some licenses for your Linux instances. And on top of that, you have to license Azure Kubernetes Service or any other platform to run your container-based solutions. So this is not included in the Azure Stack HCI licensing. So today we are talking about Azure Stack HCI operating system, and we have a lot of different opportunities to license Azure Stack HCI. And the first and simplest one is the pay-as-you-go model. So pay-as-you-go means you have no subscription for a long period, or you do not have to pay in advance a bigger amount of money. So you start your subscription whenever you want to, and you can end it every single day. So there's no lifetime of a kind of contract. And licensing Azure Stack HCI is super simple. It's a part of your Azure subscription or your Azure tenant license. So when you are using any Azure consumption so far, Azure Stack HCI would be an additional consumption to your existing Azure consumption you already have. And you pay $10 per physical month per core, not physical month, sorry, $10 per physical core per month, but only for active cores. So that's one of the benefits of Azure Stack HCI. Is very similar to your experience on Azure. You only pay for what you use. So for licensing Windows Server on premises, you are used to pay for all the physical cores that are built into the hardware, no matter if you're using them or not. On Azure Stack HCI, it's different. When you deactivate, for example, 50% of your physical cores, you do not pay for them. Azure does not see them. They are not relevant for your monthly invoice. And yeah.
Just as introduction, that's also an interesting case because when you see Intel with the rapid and scalable Xeons, there you have also some kind of licensing model. So you can buy the largest CPUs with a minimum amount of cores, and then you can just, if you need to increase the cores, you just buy more licenses to then enable more cores in the BIOS. So that's at least what Intel told me. And that makes it interesting to start with HCI with the licensing model. So if you're a startup, if you're small, if you want to start small, you don't know how many cores you need, you can just start with a simple full-blown CPU, but only enable the cores you need for the later use.
Exactly. And important to understand is that Azure Stack HCI has no hidden costs. So sometimes I get this question, what additional costs can we expect when we go with Azure Stack HCI? And my partners and customers are thinking about storage, for example. You have more storage, you have more cost. You have more traffic, you have more cost. That's not true for Azure Stack HCI. So you only pay for the physical active cores you are using, no matter how much traffic you have, how much storage you are using, how much RAM you are using, whatever. Only these $10 per physical cores per month. And on top of that, of course, you have to license Windows Server. On top of that, you have to license for some Azure services you want to run on Azure Stack HCI, or if you're using Azure Kubernetes services on top of Azure Stack HCI, of course you have to pay for that. But these costs are not existing because you are using Azure Stack HCI. These costs are existing on any other platform as well, so they are not related to your Azure Stack HCI infrastructure.
There's maybe one gain you will also have. So everything also, especially your support, comes with cost. And sometimes, as you said, they are considered, support is considered as hidden costs. But in the case of Azure Stack HCI, the Azure Stack HCI cluster inherits the service and support contracts you have with your Azure subscription. And that's for any cluster you deployed in that specific subscription. So if you have a standard support and you deploy 2,000 clusters within that subscription, they will all have standard support without additional costs. That's maybe what we should make clear. There's no hidden cost for service. And in addition, it's just covered with what you have on your physical subscription.
Exactly. So of course, on top of Azure Stack HCI licensing, you need certified hardware, for example. This hardware you purchase through the hardware vendors. Of course, these hardware bring additional cost, but it's not related to the operating system. This is related to the hardware you're choosing, and all the sizing and so on is done by the hardware vendor, and there will be an individual contract. So of course you can choose hardware to buy, you can choose hardware to rent, a lot of flexibility on the hardware side as well, but this has nothing to do with the cost of the operating system itself. But now let's switch to the more interesting licensing of Azure Stack HCI. So of course, the pay-as-you-go is the easiest to understand and the most flexible because you can turn it on and off whenever you want to. But from the commercial perspective, the Azure Hybrid Benefit usage for Azure Stack HCI is the most interesting version right now. So to use the Azure Hybrid Benefit, you need one of two things. So alternative one is you have a Windows Server data center license for all the physical cores in your Azure Stack HCI cluster, plus a software assurance for all the physical cores in your Azure Stack HCI cluster that is active. So an active software assurance. Or Alternative B, you have a Windows Server data center subscription. So for example, through the CSP, Cloud Solution Provider channel, you can purchase Windows Server Data Center as a subscription, and this includes Azure Hybrid benefits as well. And with these Azure Hybrid benefits, you get three really interesting benefits when it comes to Azure Stack HCI and Azure Hybrid solutions. So one is for your on-premises infrastructure, so your Azure Stack HCI. The other is for your cloud usage on Azure. And the third one is about running Azure Kubernetes services. And we will cover all the three of them in this Hybrid Friends session. So let's start with the containers. When you have, for example, a 3-node cluster of Azure Stack HCI, every single node has 24 cores, then you have all up 72 physical cores. When you license all these 72 physical cores with Windows Server Data Center plus Software Assurance or a data center subscription, then you have the right to run 72 virtual CPUs of Azure Kubernetes services on this cluster without getting invoiced for this service. So on this screen, you can see that Azure Kubernetes service on HCI has a price. It's billed monthly, and the cost is $80 per virtual core per day. So that could be a lot, depending on how much you use. And if you have 72 cores for free, in your 72-core licensed Azure Stack HCI environment, you can do the math by yourself. You save a lot of money. So that's interesting for all those who run Azure Kubernetes services on Azure Stack HCI. The second interesting thing is for all those customers who are using on-premises infrastructure with Azure Stack HCI because of, well, there are a lot of reasons why you have a hybrid infrastructure and you need on-premises infrastructure as well. But on top of that, you already moved some or many of your workloads to the Azure cloud. And maybe some of these workloads are Windows Server virtual machines. And if you have a Windows Server virtual machine, so in my example here on the screen, you can see it's an 8-core virtual machine, and you have two parts of the all-up price for this. You have, in this example, $400 per month for the virtual machine itself. So for the infrastructure, for the compute, storage, everything that's included in this virtual machine. And you have additional cost of around about $200 per month for the usage of Windows Server in this virtual machine. So you are licensing Windows Server on the Azure VM on top of the compute. And you can see that there are two options to handle this operating system cost. So one is you pay for it. The second one is you have an Azure Hybrid benefit. And when you have the Azure Hybrid benefit, you will not pay the $200 in this example for the virtual machine operating system, because this is included in the data center plus software assurance license in the Azure Hybrid benefit. So in our example, when you have the 3-node cluster on premises with Azure Stack HCI, every node has 24 cores. So all up, you have 72 cores. Then you can use 9 virtual machines with 8 cores in Azure. So all up 72. And you do not have to pay for the Windows Server guest operating system. So when we do some math and say, okay, we have $200 in this example per month, then it's around about $5,000 per year. And now we multiply, let's say, with 2. So with 16, to have 16 cores, because 16 cores is the base license for Windows Server, then we have $10,000 on 16 cores per year. That's $30,000 in 3 years. And now if you look how much you have to pay for Windows Server Data Center plus Software Assurance for 16 cores, the licensing cost for Data Center plus Software Assurance is much lower than the savings on Azure. So it's absolutely a no-brainer that if you have Azure Stack HCI on premises and Azure VMs with Windows Server running at the same time, to go with the Azure hybrid benefits, because it's a minus invest you have to make. That's super interesting for our hybrid customers. And the third one, and this is most relevant for the usage of Azure Stack HCI, you get Azure Stack HCI without additional costs. So the $10 per physical core per month will not be charged. How does this work? You have the license, Windows Server Data Center plus software assurance. Now you connect your Azure Stack HCI with the Azure portal. You go to the Azure portal, you select your Azure Stack HCI cluster, and you go to the segment configuration. And then you can see the Azure Hybrid benefit. There's an Activate button. If you press that Activate button, a pop-up will explain to you how this works, what this means. And the technical thing behind the scene is that the Azure portal is checking if the tenant you're connected to has a software assurance somewhere. And if they find it, they activate the Azure Hybrid benefit automatically. If not, you get a small note where you can write an email to with some contract information about your software assurance, and then it will be activated manually in between 24 hours roundabout. So now you have the Azure Hybrid benefit activated, and you will not get charged for the $10. So you get Azure Kubernetes for free. You can use the same amount of virtual CPUs on Azure with the guest operating system, Windows Server, without paying for that. And you get Azure Stack HCI for free. So now, and that's important to understand as well from the licensing perspective, when you exchange your data center software assurance to Azure Stack HCI, you are losing the right to use Windows Server Data Center for your on-premises guest operating systems. So theoretically, you have to license your guest operating systems on Azure Stack HCI again, but that's not needed if you do the following thing. So on the right side of the screen, you can see the Azure Hybrid benefits are activated. There's a green mark. And below, you can see the Windows Server subscription add-on. This Windows Server subscription add-on on Azure Stack HCI is an option to license Windows Server for the guest operating system. So imagine you go with the pay-as-you-go model, and you do not have any Windows Server licenses for the guest operating system, and you do not want to purchase an OEM license or a volume license contract because you do not know for how long you want to run this Azure Stack HCI. Maybe it's only for demo or something like that. Then you can purchase the Windows Server subscription add-on. But this is very costly. It's around about $23, $24 per physical core per month, but there is no contract, so you can start and stop it every single day. One of the benefits of this Windows Server subscription is that it's the same licensing type as for the guest operating system in Azure. So it includes the Windows Server Azure Edition, for example, an edition of Windows Server that only runs on Azure and Azure Stack HCI. And when you run a virtual machine with Windows Server on Azure, you do not need Windows Server calls to access it. And that's true for Azure Stack HCI as well. So when you use the Windows Server subscription and you use the Azure Edition, then you have two benefits. You do not need Windows Server calls, and hot patching is included. So maybe you have heard about that with the next version of Windows Server. Hot patching will be included in Windows Server 2025. So included is not really true because it's not part of the operating system, but Windows Server 2025 is supporting hot patching. And it will be delivered through an Azure Arc enabled service. So you can purchase the hot patching for your Windows Server 2025 instances, no matter where they are running, on premises, on the edge, hybrid cloud, any cloud, competitors cloud. But with the Azure edition of Windows Server on Azure Stack HCI, you get hot patching for free as well. So when you activated the Azure Hybrid Benefit, 1 second please, the Azure Hybrid Benefit, and you see the green mark, then below the Windows Server subscription add-on does no longer has a purchase button, it has an activate benefit button. And when you press this activate benefit button, you get Windows Server guest operating system licenses for free. So you exchanged your data center software assurance to Azure Stack HCI usage for free. You are losing the right to run virtual machines in the guest operating system on your Azure Stack HCI from the software assurance perspective, but you're getting back the right to use it through the Windows Server subscription add-on. But it's important that you press that button. So if you run Windows Server in the guest operating system, you activated the Azure Hybrid Benefit and you do not press the Windows Server subscription add-on button, from the licensing perspective, you are running virtual machines with Windows Server without having a license. But that's only pressing one button, and then you get all the benefits like no calls needed, hot patching, and so on and so on.
Yeah, and what we, as we were talking about Windows Server Azure Edition, we should make clear it's basically Windows Server Data Center with all its features, but it adds, as you already said, the Arc integration and some kind of attestation service like we have in Azure Stack HCI to run those licenses, the license option, and also being, let's say, connected to Azure to have these additional benefits like attesting, so that you can run hot patching, that you can run it as an Azure extension. That's also maybe one thing we need to make loud and clear here. It's that Azure Stack HCI in particular, and everything you can run on it, is considered an Azure feature. So it's not like your Windows Server you can run on-prem, running everything encapsulated. It's really considered an Azure feature, and as let's say, not in the Microsoft data center part of Azure. So it's something running at the edge basically, but it's if you ask the product groups, it's an Azure feature. It's not an operating system or a disconnected operating system.
Yeah. And there's one more benefit coming with Azure Stack HCI. So maybe you have heard that with the next version of Windows Server, a lot of features will come to Windows Server that were exclusively meant for Azure Stack HCI on premises. So you might wonder, why should I go with Azure Stack HCI if many of these features are going to Windows Server itself? And the answer is, beside other parts of an answer, that Azure Stack HCI includes some Azure Arc enabled benefits without additional cost. So for example, extended security updates. You can purchase extended security updates through Azure Arc enabled services for any unsupported Windows Server, no matter where they are running. But if you migrate or move your unsupported Windows servers to Azure Stack HCI or to Azure, you do not have to pay for extended security updates. Or you can use the Azure Update Manager. So as an alternative for your vSUS server, as a modern cloud-based update manager. Outside of Azure Stack HCI, you have to pay $5 per virtual server per month. On Azure Stack HCI, that's for free. And there are more Azure Arc services that are for free on Azure Stack HCI, and you have to pay for these services outside of Azure Stack HCI. So you should see that Azure Stack HCI does not only bring you benefits from the feature perspective, so also from the perspective of included Arc-enabled services that are without cost on Azure Stack HCI. Yeah, that's the licensing perspective of the operating system from Azure Hybrid benefits. One more interesting thing about Azure Stack HCI is that you have something unique on premises that is not available anywhere else, and this is Azure Virtual Desktop. Azure Virtual Desktop is the only platform that contains Windows multi-session. So Azure Virtual Desktop is a kind of management tool to run virtual instances. These virtual instances could be Windows Server based, could be Windows client based. So very similar to RDS or Virtual Desktop Infrastructure. It's Azure managed. But this Azure Virtual Desktop includes the possibility to run as an operating system Windows with a multi-session functionality. And this is unique to Azure Virtual Desktop. So when you have a Windows instance on premises outside of Azure Virtual Desktop, you can only access this instance with one user at the same time. That's different for Windows Server. You can access with multiple people at the same time. That's the reason why in an RDS environment, people usually use Windows Server as the operating system because of the multi-session functionality. Windows itself has multi-session as well, but only on Azure in Azure Virtual Desktop. And this came to Azure Stack HCI February this year. And that's a huge benefit as well. And the pricing is very similar to Azure. So you have to pay for the access from the user or device. You, of course, do not have to pay for the infrastructure like on Azure because the infrastructure is your own. You have to pay for that because you pay for the hardware. You have to pay for the operating system, Azure Stack HCI, of course, but there's no other cost for the infrastructure itself. But there is a cost for the usage of Azure Stack HCI from the management perspective, because you are using parts of Azure to run Azure Virtual Desktop on premises, and this cost is $1 per virtual core per hour.
Yeah, that's maybe one thing we can explain here. As you know from classic terminal servers or VDI farms, you have the management plane, which is Azure Virtual Desktop as your management plane for either your Azure or your Azure Stack HCI workloads there. But what you also use is some kind of cloud component. So for the initial connect of the user, you need to have the client access arrays. You need to have all those load balancing mechanisms which distribute all your users throughout the host clusters. And that's one thing which is still residing in Azure. So there's no class arrays on Azure Stack HCI running. It's all in Azure, and you only have your session hosts on-prem. So that's where the fee comes from. It's, as you already said, Sven, it's the management fee for the Arc-enabled service for the management plane, but it's also for the client access arrays, load balancing, security mechanisms you have in front of, say, front door, etc. So everything is included with that per vehicle per hour charge you have for the VMs running on your session hosts.
Yes, exactly. So I have two more topics for today that could be relevant for you as well. So maybe you are a hoster and you are interested in Azure Stack HCI because there are some benefits we already talked about. The all-up answer to the question, are hosters allowed to use Azure Stack HCI, is no. But there's a but. There's an exception to that. So let's have a look at this slide. So as a hoster, there are two options where you run or where you manage the hardware. The hardware could be located at the customer side, but you are doing kind of management for this hardware. The customer does not want to have it, but they want to have it on premises in their location because of any kind of reason. If this is a dedicated hardware to the customer, and the hoster is managing this hardware, and the Azure subscription, where Azure Stack HCI is connected to, is the customer subscription. And then the guest operating system and any apps running on these VMs can be the customers want, so bring your own license, or license through the SPLA, so software provider license agreement. That's absolutely possible because it's important for Azure Stack HCI that the licensing of Azure Stack HCI is done by the customer, not by the hoster. And you can do that same scenario on the hoster side. So if the customer decides to have a dedicated server, but it's not on premises at the customer side, but at the hoster side, completely managed by the hoster, but the Azure subscription is a customer one. And then again, the guest operating system and apps can be licensed by the customer through bring your own license, or maybe SPLA licensing offered by the service provider. But what's not allowed is that Azure Stack HCI is a kind of shared cluster for multiple customers. The Azure subscription is the hoster's one, and the hoster is using the benefits of Azure Stack HCI, like extended security included, or Azure Virtual Desktop, including multi-session. All these things are not allowed for a shared computing at the moment. But there has been an interesting announcement this week or last week,
It was
not from
last week. Yeah.
Microsoft. Sorry, last week.
It was last week.
It was not from Microsoft itself, but from the organization of the European cloud solution providers. And they posted on their website that Microsoft and this organization agreed that Microsoft will do some changes on their Azure Stack HCI licensing, or maybe on the product, so we will know. And the idea is that the European hosters see a disadvantage versus Azure, and they want to be able to have a kind of fair licensing or fair business option. And concrete, they say, we would like to have multi-session Windows Desktop 11, Windows 11. They want to have free extended security updates and so on. And I have not heard about an official answer or statement from Microsoft so far, but I already requested it. But it looks like that there's really a kind of official agreement, and the post of the organization says in the next 9 months, Microsoft will deliver a solution. That could be super interesting for all our European hosters. And maybe Microsoft will do these changes for hosters all across the world. I expect this, but I do not know right now. So we will update you as soon as there is anything official. But this is a comment that could be super relevant for you if you are a hoster and if you are interested in having Azure Stack HCI as a platform in your infrastructure or your data center as well.
Yeah, but maybe one thing we should make clear, because many people will now ask why in, let's say, 9 to 12 months. Because if you look on Azure Stack HCI, with enabling hosters, it's not only licensing. As you know, there must be, we are not really running as a multi-tenant operating system here. There's not an option to have multi-tenant subscription like you would have with Azure Stack Hub or with, for example, AWS Outpost. So that's something we still have a feature gap within Azure Stack HCI, and with that agreement, we need to have development work in place.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you always said. There's nothing committed yet. What we need to do, it's just we want to do it. We agreed to do it. Now let's figure out how.
Yeah.
And it's
So
contractual terms, but there's also technical implications we need to bring to the platform. To re-deliver that experience for our hosters. And I think it was also more or less triggered, and it's really urgent for the hosters, as a lot of them need to move from VMware service, VMware with Broadcom to another platform, and most of them considering HCI as their next, let's say, operating system to use.
Yeah, exactly. So super interesting topic. And the last topic I have for today is a new way to license Azure Stack HCI. It's a preview, so it's coming soon to market, only through HPE, Dell, and Lenovo. This is an OEM license for Azure Stack HCI. So it's a prepaid license that is fixed to the hardware. So you purchase the Azure Stack HCI certified hardware. You configure this license together with the hardware. It's built into the BIOS, and it will be activated automatically when you connect your Azure Stack HCI with Azure. And that's really a great product. So we do not have a final pricing for that, so we are not able to talk about that, but only from the um, easy to use perspective, that could be really a great alternative. So if you say, I want to run my hardware for the next 6, 7 years, I do not know. I want to know exactly what the cost is. I want to have a one-time price. I do not want to care about how to license or how to activate or how to do anything. I purchase the use right for Azure Stack HCI together with the hardware. And it's not only including the use right of Azure Stack HCI, it also includes the use right for Azure Kubernetes services and the use right of Windows Server for the guest operating system. So the three most relevant components are included in this license as well. So it does not contain the Azure Hybrid Benefit. So this is super important to know, because with Azure Hybrid Benefit and with software assurance, you are allowed to use the latest version of Windows Server in your guest operating system. You are allowed to use the Windows Server Azure Edition that is including the hot patching. You are allowed to use virtual machines on Azure without paying for the Windows Server guest operating system. So these parts are not included. But what is included is Azure Stack HCI cost, Windows Server guest operating system cost for the version of the license when you purchased it. So when, for example, Windows Server 2025 will be in market and this OEM SKU of Azure Stack HCI will be refreshed to 2025, then you can use Windows Server 2025 in this environment. If a newer version will come to market, you are not allowed to upgrade. This is possible with the Azure Hybrid Benefit, because there you have the software assurance included. Software assurance is not included in the OEM SKU. But for many scenarios, I think that license is absolutely what our customers need. Now it depends on the pricing. The pricing is coming from the OEM because it's an OEM license. It's part of your hardware configuration. So there will be an Azure Stack HCI show in August 2nd, session I do on my YouTube channel, for example, together with the MVP Manfred Helber. And in this session, we will go a little bit deeper into the new SKU and explain how it works, what the differences are with the pay-as-you-go license and the Azure Hybrid Benefit. So if you're interested in that, there has been a post on my LinkedIn account this week. So you can look for Sven Langenfeld on LinkedIn, and then you can follow me not to miss any news on this new SKU. Or you follow us on YouTube as well to watch the Azure Stack HCI show on August 2nd, 12 o'clock, high noon in German time. Yeah. That's
Maybe
it so
one,
far from the licensing perspective. Any questions about the new SKU, Flo?
yeah. So maybe one question you can take with you to the HCI show, as we all know, the OEM licenses, especially for Windows Server, there was no direct support from Microsoft. It was mostly given through the hardware vendor and
Yeah.
then escalated to Microsoft. How is the support then handled with the HCI OS and also with the Windows Service license through that as a guest? So maybe that would be a would be a question for me for the HCI show.
That
Um,
license support is part of the OEM contract as well. So your first contact for this support is the OEM.
So that would be all from my perspective for today. So if there are more questions, I think our users will, or our followers will use the comments, and otherwise I would definitely highlight the HCI show there. Everything will also be linked in the video description so that no one can miss your profile or anything else on your shows. And then also your website will be there where you really collect all news and everything great and new and all the technical experts we have in that space. So from my perspective, thank you so much. And yeah, as you all see, I had camera issues during the whole video, but luckily Sven stayed with you. So perfect. Thank you so much,
Perfect.
Sven. And
Thank you, and bye-bye. See you next time
see
with Azure
you.
Stack HCI.
Thank you guys. Bye.